One of the few questions I managed to get in was asking him about his presidential library. In his horror, he was silent. I rushed in to kind of apologize or to cover my faux pas. I said, a presidential library, it can be more like, and then out of nowhere it came to me. I said, a theme park. It could be the Trump theme park. The look of horror of on his face passed, and then a look of, I would say, something close to wonder crossed his face.
And you then, might be responsible for this monstrosity.
I very well might.
Michael.
Joanna.
I wish that we were together in the studio. It's Tuesday and we should be. This week you're coming in on Thursday. That's 2 weeks in a row that you've messed with our real in-person conversation, which I much prefer.
It's Passover this week. I'm coming in for Passover on tomorrow night. So I will be there on Thursday.
Okay.
Passover.
Okay.
Should I explain that to you?
No, but you could explain what we try and do 3 times a week. You're Michael Wolff. You've written 4 books on Donald Trump, 2 books on Rupert Murdoch. I'm Joanna Coles, the chief content officer of The Daily Beast. I've been a journalist for years. And, well, you tell people what we're trying to do and where we're going.
Just let me know, I still don't know what a chief content officer is. A totally made up title in this, I guess, in this new social media age. I think of you as an editor-in-chief, the old-fashioned way, boss. Maybe I'll call you boss, as we used to do.
Boss is good. We have a guy here who's been here since the beginning of the Daily Beast called Michael Daly. He's a very, very good reporter. He calls me boss.
So
I quite like it.
But I think it is important to say once again what we are doing, because I think we are doing something different from virtually what everybody else who is covering Donald Trump and every other journalist everywhere is covering Donald Trump, and basically only Donald Trump, because he is the story that has crowded out all other stories. But my feeling has been always since the beginning, and I've been doing this now for more than 10 years, is that he is the most unique figure ever to run the government or to aspire to run the government and to take our attention, because he is a man who lives solely in the moment. What he does, what he says, what he decides is all dependent on what is going through his head at any particular moment. And there is no pattern, no logic, no, certainly no intellectual foundation for what goes through his head. But nevertheless, this is the thing that is central to all of our lives. So to understand that that he works in a way and according to a theory, if you will, that no one in a position of this kind of leadership has ever worked. So to understand that, to be able to say, okay, this is the strange and peculiar thing that is motivating him at any given moment, is a kind of a civic duty. And that's what we're doing now.
Well, I like the idea of it being a civic duty, and I come at it from the point of view of character is destiny. He is a fascinating character. He's astride, as you say, all our lives. And I've always found politics actually quite boring to read about and to listen about, because it's always been about policy. It feels dry. We know that politicians are hypocritical. They don't say what they mean a lot of the time. A lot of the time they're on the take, but it's all sort of going on in the background. And what I find fascinating about Donald Trump is not only that, and when I say we, I don't mean me particularly, but, 70 million voters at the last election still bought the idea that Donald Trump was a successful businessman, because that's how he'd been portrayed by Mark Burnett on the reality show The Apprentice. I think it's a huge part of why he got elected. And he's weirdly transparent. I mean, the thing that one has to remember is that, if you ever wanted to get hold of someone in the Biden government, or indeed the president himself, you would have to go through 30 layers of people to get there. A lot of journalists have Donald
And then
Trump's
there
cell
would be
phone
no
number, and he
there.
picks up. Right, there would be no there. But Donald Trump calls reporters. You can call Donald Trump and he will pick up the phone if he's not in the middle of bombing Iran, and perhaps he would even pick it up if he was in the middle of bombing Iran. So that's what makes him so much more fascinating to cover. And the people around him are interesting too, because as you're frequently pointing out, none of them would get a job in any kind of regular cabinet. This is not a regular time, and the entire world right now is enthralled to what he will do next. And he doesn't seem to know what he's going to do next. Anyway, for those of you who haven't listened or watched the podcast before, that's what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to cover it in a New York Times or Wall Street Journal way, though obviously we read them and we appreciate what they do.
No,
Michael
I
doesn't,
don't
but I
appreciate
do.
what they do. Quite
I
the
knew
opposite.
you were going to say that. I knew
think
you were
we're
going to say that.
partly in this mess because the New York Times does not have the wherewithal, and specifically does not have the language to call a moron, and so it continuously weaves an essential rationale for what he's doing when there is no rationale. So that's what we're here to remind everybody, that that this has happened. This enormous historical moment has happened on a totally random basis. What's going to happen? What's going to happen today in Iran or tomorrow in Iran? Random. No rhyme nor reason. So the New York Times can't have a headline. No rhyme nor reason in the White House. President is nuts. I mean, all of these kinds of things, which would be more accurate than what the New York Times says, they can't say just because they don't have that language.
Well, and the New York Times, I think, never took his campaign as seriously as they should have done, and they seemed astonished both times when he won. Anyway, we don't need to worry about the New York Times. I need to make a huge apology for something I got wrong last week when we were discussing Michelle Pfeiffer and you said, where's she come back from? What do you remember her from? I foolishly said Casino, and I think we probably got 2,000 comments pointing out that, of course, she wasn't in Casino. That was Sharon Stone. Michelle Pfeiffer was actually in Scarface, another mafia movie. I've not seen Scarface. I'm assuming it's a mafia movie. What can I say? All blondes, they look alike.
No,
they
Scarface
just look alike.
is not a mafia movie. You're going to
Okay, what is Scarface about? What is Scarface about? I don't watch violent movies. I don't watch violent movies.
Oh my God,
what
I'm not even going to
Scarface
address
about?
this. This is
What is it about?
Well, it's about cocaine dealers in Florida.
Oh, it's about cocaine. I didn't know that. I thought it sounded to me like it was about the mafia.
I mean, in Miami,
Scarface.
it's the great Miami drug film.
Okay, well, I haven't seen it. I have seen Casino. I totally got Sharon Stone confused
Brian
with
De
Michelle
Palma, by the
Pfeiffer.
way, who I happen to know, is a faithful listener.
A faithful listener of Inside Trump's Head.
Yes.
Oh, good. Well, shout out to Brian. And Brian, I'm sorry I haven't watched Scarface.
He lives down the street.
Okay, cool. Well, there you go. So anyway, I'm sorry I got that wrong. And I have seen Michelle Pfeiffer in lots of things. I hesitate to say The Witches of Eastwick because that wasn't a great movie, but she was in that with Cher and Susan Sarandon.
Are you sure? Have you checked this?
I actually did watch that. I watched it like 40 years ago, though, I think. Anyway, I apologize, and thank you to everybody that pointed it out. It was a lot of people. And just to say, don't forget, we are independent media, so we appreciate your support. Feel free to press the subscription button on wherever you get your podcasts, because hopefully we're about to hit 600,000 subscribers, actually, possibly by the end of the week. And I think the week after next, Michael, we hit our 100th episode of Inside Trump's Head. So I feel like we should do something special for it. Do you have any ideas? If anybody has any ideas, please suggest. It could be some more limericks, some more poems. arts and
you
crafts.
would have think in 100 episodes we would have gotten to the heart of this man. Well, maybe we have, and it
Well,
makes
maybe
no
there isn't a
difference.
heart. Maybe there isn't a heart. But I tell you what we are going to do. We are going to now play, and this is complicated for the people who are listening, although you will get a blast of music. So last night, Eric Trump released a video which he says he has spent the last 6 months putting his heart and soul into this project. So please, let's take it away. Oh, magnificent music, which in fact we discovered is called Limitless. It's by Aleko Romeo, and it's a royalty-free song.
I'm not sure anybody has spent enough time on the effect of everybody in the world being able to make a cheesy video. The whole world is just cheesy videos everywhere.
Can you just explain what Eric Trump has spent the last 6 months and his heart and soul on for people who didn't see it? Because it's well,
this is a model. I mean, what you see in the video is a tower. It actually kind of looks like the Freedom Tower in New York City that replaced the World Trade Center. But this building does not exist. This is just a model of the prospective Trump presidential library, or the Trump post-presidential library. So in a way, that is good news, which is to say that there is an acknowledgement here on the part of the Trump family that there will be a post-presidency. There will not be an eternal Trump presidency. In other words, he leaves office and he will do what other presidents have done, is to build a library. And I actually have a story about this. After he was defeated in 2020, in the spring of 2021, when Trump, for reasons that will always astound me and bewilder me, invited me to have dinner with him in Mar-a-Lago. I went down, and before dinner we had a long conversation, very long, like 3 hours. Some typical Trump, couldn't shut up, kept going. And at one point, one of the few questions I managed to get in was asking him about his presidential library. Remember, he's out of office. He's no longer the president. He's in this moment of post-presidency when former presidents turn to thinking about their legacy and their library. So I brought this up, and he looked at me with horror. And that was, to me, the first indication and the strongest indication that in his mind he was not at all finished with being president. So do not bring up a presidential library, which means you are finished with your presidency. But there, I suddenly, in his horror, he was silent, which was really rare.
Well, that's really unusual.
So and I was kind of discombobulated, and so I rushed in to kind of apologize, or to cover my faux pas about the library, and saying, a presidential library doesn't have to be a library. Because suddenly it stuck in my head that that's what he was objecting to, library, books. I said, a presidential library, it can be more like, and then out of nowhere it came to me, I said, a theme park. It could be the Trump theme park, with all kinds of, they can experience the Trump world. And the look of horror of on his face passed, and then a look of, I I would say something close to wonder crossed his face.
So you
Then
might be responsible for
I
this
might.
monstrosity.
I very well might. And then we had certainly a 5 or 6 minute conversation about what a Trump theme park might be like. Restaurants, hotels. It was a
Casinos,
yes, it was a
things
vision.
going bankrupt, Trump
Um,
steaks, Trump wine, Trump champagne,
and
Trump
this, yes,
University. You could
I
get a
think what
degree
is
on your way
happening now,
out.
what they are building, I might have played a significant part in this.
Michael Wolff. It's sort of a remarkable building. I'm assuming it's, as they say, a mix of residential and office units. And it's got those funny little people that architects' videos always have now, imagining people using this space. There's a big garden. There's a huge American flag that's rolling down the front of it. Enormous Trump name. It feels to me like something you would see in Abu Dhabi or Dubai, very tall, towering over the Miami skyline. And, well, it doesn't look like it would have a single book in it.
No, but it will be, and I'm sure that this is that there is whatever is going on here, whatever the legacy proportions of this are, I'm sure they are also attentive to the Trump family money-making opportunities.
Of course, because they've immediately opened the Trump Library, Presidential Library Fund. People can, I think the lowest number that you could give was 10,000. And I'm sure there will be plenty of sponsorship opportunities. I almost wonder if we should avail ourselves of a sponsorship opportunity and do the Inside Trump's Headroom. We can
Okay,
podcast
well,
from there when it's built. I mean, who knows? It's going to be built faster, I'm sure, than the Obama Library, which opens this summer and has been a hideous journey for the Obamas, and frankly is not a very attractive building.
I would like to see some reporting on that. What happened here? Well,
the Swamp has done a lot of reporting on it. David Gardner, our chief Washington correspondent, has done a lot of reporting on it, actually.
Well, tell me.
I mean, it's been delayed.
Well, what
There've been
what
all
are
sorts of
the delays have been caused by construction,
Well,
by
construction issues, by lawsuits, inevitably. It's complicated. I now, of course, can't remember the details because my head's full of what's happening in the war in Iran. But I will find the details and we can discuss on Thursday. But it's not been by any means an easy process for them. And 8 years on, it should have been opened.
They've settled on a phenomenally ugly structure.
I don't know. I think it was supposed to look modern. It was supposed to represent the digital age as opposed to a library stuffed full of old moldering books.
Maybe in the end, the Obamas turned out not to have any taste either.
Well, that's possible, actually. Anyway, let me come back to you with that because it's an interesting story, the Obama Library, but it does, in theory, eventually open this summer. But it's been wrought with lawsuits, as I'm sure Trump's will be too.
And dare I say, because it's not exactly on the horizon, the Bush and Clinton libraries, where are they? Do they exist?
Well, the Clinton Library's in Arkansas, in Little Hope.
And is it a big building? Is it a
I don't know. It's a great question. I've never been. I haven't knowingly been to Arkansas. And I'm sure you probably went there with Bobby Kennedy, didn't you, back in the day?
No.
I know you went to Alabama.
We were in Mississippi.
I thought you were in Alabama.
Oh, maybe it was Alabama. No, Muscle Shoals. No, it was Mississippi, actually.
Okay. I promise you said Alabama.
I might have.
Anyway. But the other thing I forgot... Okay, the other thing I forgot to mention is there will, of course...
It was Alabama. Birmingham, Alabama. Yes.
Thank you.
Duh.
Thank you. But I know close observers of this podcast would remember that, I think. But the other thing that the Trump Library will have is a golden statue of Donald Trump waving at people. So a bit like, do you remember those huge statues of Saddam Hussein that got pulled down very early in the American invasion of Iraq? It sort of reminded me of one of those. Hand sort of waving,
I'm
lifted
gonna
and
propose a different outcome here, because I think it is possible, certainly as possible, that we are now in the midst of things going incredibly wrong for Donald Trump. That when he exits this presidency, which he will exit, it will be in some form of disgrace, and of massive unpopularity, and of which will surely limit his the post-presidential awe that he is expecting.
okay, well, that leads me to read his Trump Truth Social, um, which he fired off this morning in a sort of weird schoolboy rage. And this is obviously about the Strait of Hormuz, which is still closed. Um, and the Americans are, as we understand it, trying to decide whether or not to call victory, pull out, but leave the Strait of Hormuz in an uncertain position. Okay, and this is him sort of tweeting out, I think, to the European countries. Build up some delayed courage. Go to the Strait and just take it. You'll have to start learning how to fight for yourself. The USA won't be there to help you anymore, just like you weren't there for us. Iran has been essentially decimated. The hard part is done. Go get your own oil.
Okay, so actually, the key thing that is obviously wrong here is that the hard part is not done. The easy part is done. And what he is saying and what they are now laying out is that we will declare victory, go home, and we will leave the Strait of Hormuz um, under control of the Iranians. Now, that is understand the Iranians have now claimed this as part of their territory, which is entirely new. That did not exist before the war. So what the war will have accomplished is to give the Strait of Hormuz to the Iranians. They have control of that. They did not have control of it before, but that's what the war will have accomplished, to let the Iranians have absolute control over 20% of the world's oil, to keep the world in effectively a stranglehold. That's what Donald Trump will have accomplished.
And just to remind people, 20% of the world's oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz, which, of course, most people had never even heard of before the Americans started bombing 5.5 weeks ago. So Michael, what's going on inside Donald Trump's head as he looks out over this thing? He's alternately said he wants the Iranians to declare unconditional surrender, which they're clearly not going to do. He's already declaring it a victory. Pete Hegseth is going around flapping his pecs, saying it's all marvelous. What actually is happening in Donald Trump's head?
Well, I think that he went into this with, I was going to say the best of intentions, but that seems weird. The best of military intentions. That is to say, Donald Trump, the asymmetric president, is now waging a perfectly traditional war. So he is doing. There was a famous book written about the Vietnam War called "The Best and the Brightest," and
Mm-hmm.
essentially what that said is that all these smarty pants guys, these Harvard guys, and these corporate chief kind of guys, were unable to fight this functionally ragtag band of guerrillas from North Vietnam. And ever since, basically, that's we've understood that war had significantly changed. The idea of bombing your way to victory, of bringing heavy troops in as to clear the field ahead of you was a way that didn't necessarily work anymore. So Donald Trump's dumb and dumbest are so dumb as
I
to
love the juxtaposition of dumb and
as
dumbest
to
against the
as
best
to
and the
as
brightest.
to imitate the best and the brightest, who we have long since understood were in fact dumb and dumbest. So the cycle here is kind of extraordinary, but
Well, and I think that's what gave Donald Trump the confidence to go in and bomb, as he kept saying, the hell out of people, because brighter people had made plans before. We saw this in Baghdad, and it didn't work.
Again and again. So they're just doing what doesn't work. And now, there's this other added thing here that no one had told Donald Trump about, partly because he didn't pay attention to the war in Ukraine. I mean, he kept brushing this off. I'm going to solve it in a day. Pay no attention. Not interested. And I think from a distant perspective, we will look back and say, what was the important event of our time? And one of those important events will be the war in Ukraine, because it changed the nature of war. It's suddenly the war in Ukraine inaugurated the age of drones, cheap drones. So
Well, we've used drones in Afghanistan.
no, well, not remotely at the level that they are being used in Ukraine, and not remotely in the way that they can be assembled by almost anybody. I mean, this is entirely a new a new factor in waging war. I mean, a factor so great that that is destabilizing the very nature of the power of the U.S. military against an enemy which has no power except cheap drones, which the Iranians do, in which they have clearly paid attention to what the Ukrainians have done. So in this situation, in the paradigm here, we are Russia and the Iranians are the Ukrainians.
Ukraine. So we underestimated the enemy, and Trump is now trying to figure out what to do. And he probably, as you say, he may just sort of move from moment to moment without any clear
Well,
indication of
right
what he's
at
going to
this
do.
moment, he has this. Remember, there is his deadline, which people keep coming back to, although the guy has never stuck to any deadlines ever, of 4 to 6 weeks. We are now at week 4, or slightly more than week
Well,
4.
Saturday will be week 6. That will have
And
been 6 weeks.
so we come up to the deadline. What is he going to do? Now, remember, at the same time, we are amassing all kinds of troops in the region. What is he going to do with them? The truth is, he has no idea. He just doesn't know. But he does, I think, increasingly have an idea that this is a significant problem for him. How does he solve this problem? Well, he only has really 2 alternatives, more or less. And we don't know. I mean, everybody can sort of shrug at this point. What will he do? Will we invade the country, or will we retreat from the country? But
And
in
what will
any
happen to the
event,
Strait
if
of
we retreat
Hormuz?
from the country, we leave the Iranians in a in a in I'm trying to. I mean, it's a complicated position that we leave them, because obviously the leadership has been decimated. The infrastructure, 11,000 targets that we have bombed, but at the same time, the leadership stays in place, and they now have this lock on the world's oil. So, what have we accomplished? I mean, that is going to be the question afterwards. And the question Donald Trump, one would hope, is going to have to answer.
Well, and perhaps because it's an existential fight for the Iranians, they also seem to have figured out that Donald Trump says a lot, doesn't always mean a lot. You can push back on him. And every time he says, well, we're negotiating with the Iranians and it's going well, they issue a statement saying, no, we're not negotiating and it's not going well, which is also pretty amusing. And nobody seems to know who we are negotiating with. Nobody knows who's in charge.
Yeah. So what happens? I mean, the larger question is, what price does Donald Trump pay for this? This is
Right.
obviously a mistake to have waged this war. Having made that mistake, the war is obviously not producing the goal, not achieving the goals that he outlined for it to achieve. Um, and and we are still yet on the abyss of not knowing what to do, which way to go.
So, how is this, Michael? How is this impacting MAGA? When you talk to people from the MAGA world, what are they saying? Because I'm hearing two things. One is that MAGA is coming round to this, and one is that MAGA is splitting over this.
I'm trying to see if I can reconcile those two things. MAGA does not have any place else to go, so there's a certain kind of necessary begrudging acceptance. At the same time, MAGA is going to have to find someplace else to go because Donald Trump is not going to be here forever. So you have a significant group, MAGA group, that is positioning itself against for the future. And I think that was one of the things you saw at CPAC, enormous disgruntlement with what's going on, and in great uncertainty about how to handle it, but also a great deal of doubling down on the MAGA of it all. So there was an interesting thing at CPACs where Paxton, the who's running for the Senate
Texas.
in Texas, and is a real who would be the candidate, the Republican candidate, most easy to beat for the Democrats. And he is running against a much more traditional Republican, a rhino type, and
John Cornyn.
right, and who Trump has basically concluded he ought to back because the seat otherwise may well be imperiled. But the MAGA people, the MAGA base, are insisting on Paxton and booing Cornyn, really. So again, it's doubled down. We are MAGA. We are pure. We have a future beyond Donald Trump, and
And it should be pointed out that Ken Paxton is almost more MAGA than Trump. I mean, he's a crazy candidate. No normal person, I think, would vote for him, which is why Trump finds himself in the position of having to probably support John Cornyn, because otherwise they could lose the Senate.
right, and he cannot now do this because the MAGA people are lined up so they are so dedicated in their opposition to Cornyn and for Ken Paxton.
Yeah, it's a really interesting
So MAGA
corner of the
is
world.
certainly a thorn in Donald Trump's side, and I think that will grow. I mean, and it will, I mean, there are two things there. I mean, the war is not helping things, but also the fact that Donald Trump is a lame duck. Um, and and um, and if MAGA is going to have a future beyond this administration, and I tend to believe they will not have a future beyond this administration, but they certainly recognize that in order to have this future, they have to double down on their own purity.
So we had a very good story in The Beast pointing out that almost no member of the cabinet had been on television recently. We know that this is a cabinet that loves to talk to the press and berate the press and attack the media and say everything's the media's fault, but they've been missing in action since the beginning of the war. What's happening with Stephen Miller? We've got a new head of Homeland Security in Mark Wayne Mullin. Stephen Miller seems to have gone quiet.
I mean, I think Stephen Miller is just taking cover under the war. I don't see any indication that there is less Stephen Miller in what's going on in this White House. And in fact, the push against birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment is being led by Stephen Miller, and that is now before the Supreme Court, I think this week.
Yeah, I think we get a decision tomorrow, so we can discuss it more in full, hopefully on Thursday.
I mean, but Stephen Miller is one of the, if not the leading, well, certainly one of the leading voices in this White House, and it's an interesting thing because, I mean, let's characterize this. I think that you can safely, without fear of much contradiction, say that at the highest levels of the White House, there is a kind of official white supremacist. And one of the things I remember, especially in the first administration, but still going on, is that he would go around, and really nobody wanted to quite listen to this. He had this theory about the white majority in the U.S. and that would go away. And then he had a kind of numbers matrix of what would have to happen in order to white people to still remain the majority in America. And that was a combination of immigrants, of immigration that had to be stopped, and of the level of deportations that had to happen. And it was a kind of weird math that disguised what one person in the White House described to me as Stephen's masturbatory white race fantasies. So this is still
grotesque.
this is who is the person who is at the certainly one of the most significant voices in this administration, and that goes to all birthright citizenship is a major thing. I mean, they do see that. Now, this is something that the country is overwhelmingly in favor of. It's a fact of life that we have lived with for years.
150
Yes.
years. Yeah, 150 years.
It is what so many people, I mean, a significant portion of the American population has in fact counted on. And now these people are talking about getting rid of it, gone. And one would think that I mean, the constitutional language is so clear that one would think the Supreme Court would say, yeah, fuck you. But this is Donald Trump's court.
Yeah, although they all have their own immigration stories too. I still don't understand how J.D. Vance, who's married to Usha Vance, whose parents came from India, and who has 3 children with Usha and has another on the way, can sit at the same table as Stephen Miller. What has happened to J.D. Vance? He seems to have just vanished.
Well, I think that he has, I mean, apparently he's going to take a role in the negotiation with the Iranians, if there is a negotiation.
But isn't that only because the Iranians have said that they don't want to discuss anything with Jared and Steve Witkoff?
Well, who
Our deal guys.
Who knows? But
our deal guys.
I think it's I think it's I think it has a more political a basis here. I mean, Vance represents the MAGA no forever wars view. So best to put him into this situation to theoretically represent MAGA, and also to, from Marco Rubio's point of view, involve him in this, make him complicit. Um, this word that is frequently used, in what's going on there. So they don't want J.D. Vance out on his own as representing MAGA purity.
Okay, so let's talk about your part 2 of your Epstein diaries, which I really enjoyed reading. You're getting lots of comments on them, lots of people really engaged with them. And this is where you talk about his trip to Africa with Bill Clinton and his decision, brilliantly using his plane as bait for Bill Clinton to become one of Clinton's post-presidential friends, which actually Donald Trump is furious about because he wanted to become the dominant friend
No,
of Bill
it's
Clinton.
a kind of interesting thing. I mean, one of the things, and this will be so. Anyway, this is a series that I am doing on Substack on a weekly basis, telling the story about of what I know about Jeffrey Epstein from the beginning when I first met him in 2000, through to his death in 2019. And I'm going to be doing this on a weekly basis, like an old 19th century form. I'm Trollope or Dickens.
Well, it's a cliffhanger. It's a cliffhanger series.
And but one of the interesting things is the incredible competition between Trump and Epstein. I mean, beginning in the late 80s and running through to 2004. But part of this was this competition they had over who would be best friends with Clinton. I mean, they both had a big crush on the guy. He was both because of his incredible political talents and because of flying so near the sun. This was their kind of guy, and it was Epstein who managed to insert himself with his plane in the Clinton entourage, and much to Trump's annoyance.
Well, and you have the trip to Africa with Jeffrey Epstein, Bill Clinton, and Kevin Spacey. Again, another man that's lived very close to the, I wouldn't say sun, but certainly close to the edge, repeatedly accused of all sorts of things that he's never been found guilty of, we should say. And then your own visit to Epstein's house and Epstein's, it should be said, apparent seduction of you, because he just talks to you about yourself for an hour and you leave a journalist a man who asks questions all the time. And I've certainly sat in many rooms where you ask a question and the room goes silent and then everybody feels obligated to answer and give you stories. But you leave his house the first time thinking, gosh, I haven't asked him a single question. And then it becomes apparent a year later when he's trying to figure out how to get people to write about him in the way that he wants to be written about. So in New York Magazine and Vanity Fair, that he really is trying to solicit your advice to get the best possible kind of profile about himself, and he's pretending he doesn't want press, but actually he does want press.
I mean, that was the interesting thing, because it was like these report, because it's because of the Clinton flight that he suddenly becomes noticed. The New York Post writes a story about him. Who's this guy we never heard of with a big plane ferrying Bill Clinton around? And then because the press are lemmings. So suddenly Vanity Fair and New York Magazine are saying, okay, this guy must be important. Let's write about him. and so he calls me up, and this is, this was sort of, I mean, he had called me up once after the trip to that I talk about in the first chapter. He had
The
taken
trip to TED.
a group of people out to a tech conference in California, and then he had called me up after that for a cup of tea for a reason that I couldn't quite figure out, except to ask me about what I did and to talk about the media. And then about a year later, calls me up again, um, and for advice. So what should I? The media is calling me. I don't want to be in the media. What do I do? So, and I gave him the advice that I always give everybody who says they don't want to be in the media, which is to say, don't return the media's calls. But of course, he did return their calls, and precisely what he wanted was to be in the media. He wanted to be famous. He wanted his moment of notoriety, which was extremely strange if you think about it, because here's a guy who lived a shadow business life and a nefarious sexual life. So he was just effectively exposing himself. But I think at that moment in time, this would have been in 2002.
So before he'd done any jail time in Florida, which was
Yes. Yeah. So
2008.
this would have been, and I think that there was this moment in time when all of these guys, when media currency was among the highest, publicity was the currency of the time. And I think he wanted that, like they all did.
Well, and of course, it was pre-social media, so you had more control over the media. And a piece in Vanity Fair or a piece in New York Magazine meant something and wasn't likely to be torn apart and distributed clip by clip all over social media. I think people are much more wary about it now. But back then, as you say, it was a currency of the time and something that Donald Trump had really mastered. It's always slightly depressing seeing who presidents hang out with when they leave office, isn't it? I mean, I remember being slightly disappointed when the Obamas left the White House, and then the next thing you knew, they were kite surfing in Necker with Richard Branson.
Well, I mean,
And you thought, really?
it's a kind of, I mean, first, yeah, I mean, all of these guys together seem always unseemly, but I'm trying to think. It is now at this moment in time where I think that is much more of the case. I think then we still lived in an age of reflected glamour. That has gone away entirely. Actually quite the opposite, in which everybody who you know of, everybody whose head is above above ground level, is tainted and suspect, um, and and it is an entirely new, unexpected, um, and and the situation that still, I think, people in public life have not come to grips with, and a situation obviously affecting people who go into public life.
Right, tainted and suspect. Well, tainted and suspect. I found it a very good read, and I can't wait for next week. And I like the cliffhanger. It's a bit like sort of HBO releasing its shows once a week.
Yeah, well, the interesting is to be able to write this from inside, to tell this as a story, and not look at this as a set of revelations. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein happened to be a real person living a real life, as disreputable as it might have been. It is in that 19th century Trollope Dickens kind of way, a life in the city, a life of power, a life among other people who are also grasping for power. I mean, ultimately a story about about um, about ambition, and successful ambition and thwarted ambition.
Well, and about sex and about an industrial-sized network of young women
It
who were
is a very
abused.
yeah. I mean, that's what everybody that's just the obligatory thing that you have to
No, 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 that's the
say,
undercurrent of the whole
but
thing. I mean, that's
I
why
don't
it's as
think it's the
interesting as
undercurrent
it
of the
is.
whole thing. I think the undercurrent of the whole thing is 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 power, a moment in time when power was being seized by a whole new set of people. I mean, I think our world was being remade at this time. And yes, Jeffrey Epstein was doing all kinds of nefarious things on the side, but in the main, he was trying to make himself part of this new world of power. I mean, there's a kind of thing even in this thing, I mean, he talks to me as he's telling me about at one point he's criticizing Trump's media strategy and says he has no message. And I say to him, asking the obvious question, and your message is, and then he brings up a book, and he has the book there. It's a book by Walter Isaacson, and it's about a set of people after the Second World War, super establishment people, um, in and out of government, from important families who basically remade or helped remake the world order after the Second World War. And it was suddenly like, whoa, he sees himself as this kind of person operating in sort of the back rooms. So it was a time also of it turns out incredible delusion. Are you still
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, yeah, I'm still here. I'm still thinking. I don't like the way you dismiss the whole women thing. I think the women thing is much bigger than you realize, and it's also how he baited a lot of guys, a lot of rich men who would come to his
No,
house, and Jeffrey would
no,
set them
totally.
up
I
with
am just
women.
trying to see this story in much broader terms, and I'm trying to see it from inside, from, in a sense, the way he saw it. So it's not to at all downplay the women and the women who have been victimized in this situation, but to offer a different way of seeing this. We don't have to see one story the same way, and there's enormous amount of
No, of
pressure,
course not.
or
Of course not.
enormous amount of pressure to see this story the way from a particular political or ideological or yeah, the social media sees this in one way. I'm able to see it in a different way, and that's just the contribution I'm making. Better or worse, an, a different view.
Right, and I find your version incredibly interesting and incredibly readable, and I urge everybody listening and watching to read it because it really is good. And I noticed you were number one on Substack this
I
week
don't
because
think
people are
there
enjoying it.
Epstein is getting away with anything in my version. I think it actually probably helps explain why he did what he did in a way that I think is sort of has been difficult to understand.
Well, and I think, another way of looking at his life is the Virginia Giuffre book. That gave me insight into him and into uh, Maxwell, who's gone quiet now. I mean, who knows what's going to happen to her, whether or not she serves her sentence in her prison camp in Texas, where she was removed after, or where she was moved to after Todd Blanche, as we've talked about, um, went to interview her for 2 days last summer. Anyway, I think if you read the Virginia Giuffre book and you read your excerpts or your cliffhangers side by side, you get an interesting perspective on a very strange guy. But I can't wait to read next week's. And if you have been, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe to the Daily Beast. We're independent media, so we really appreciate your support. Feel free to leave us a comment on your favorite part of this conversation. What do you think? Trump is going to do in Iran. I wonder if we should have we should crowdsource some solutions for him, Michael.
I think there are no solutions.
There are no solutions. All right. Well, we will be back on Thursday. You'll be in the studio. Hooray! So the good news is we have so many B-Beast tier members now. There are too many names to read out, and we really appreciate your support. Thanks to our production team, Devon Rogerino, Ryan Murray, Rachel Passer, Heather Passaro, Neil Rosenhaus.